This is the second program of the third annual St. Francis College Women's Film Festival, and I'm so grateful for the support of many colleagues and programs, including the honors program, who have helped make this possible. This festival, it really takes a village. So, the Communication Arts Department spearheads it. That's my department. And the Women and Gender Studies minor helps us out. And the honors program, as I said, the Office of the Academic Dean, and the Center for Entrepreneurship is also a big part of this. After this panel, we will have a reception, and in addition to eating, you could also try out our VR, one of our VR entrants. Ji-Young Kang has a piece called Fly, that came from South Korea, and it's right on the table where you entered. So I encourage you guys to experience that because it's a lot of fun. And some of my interns will even try and grab your hand so you think you're actually touching a person in the VR. But sorry, I can't be held responsible for that. They're just trying. It's really augmented reality. So that's a fun thing to experience. And I also can't thank enough my wonderful interns and all the filmmakers who have submitted their work, and all the wonderful panelists who are here and who are coming later too. We have something for everyone. We have crowdfunding workshops, a pitch workshop by a master crowdfunder, as well as a social media charm school workshop for her. So I always wanted to go to charm school, so I'm going to try that out. So I'm really excited about today's panel, which I really see as kind of the keynote to this film festival, the way to really kick it off. And I love having three people to talk instead of just one person giving a keynote. And they're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of women's filmmaking and women's media making, because of course we're beyond film, and getting into immersive experiences and so forth. So let me start by just telling you who the panelists are, and then we'll start with the past and go on to the present, and then into the future, all right here in Founders Hall. So we have the amazing Kate Saccone, who is here from the Women Film Pioneers Project at Columbia University, which is an amazing website, which she's going to show us some of. But it's really one of the best resources out there for women filmmakers and people involved in the industry in the silent period. When I want a picture of a camera woman from the teens, I know that that's where I would go. But they have just huge resources and so much scholarship there. So I'm really excited to have Kate here. She is a project manager for that project, and she received her MA in film studies from Columbia University and her BA from Clark University. And her film writing has appeared in outlets like Cinephile and Vague Visages. And then sitting to the right of her, from your perspective, is Theresa Loong, who's going to be talking about the future. She's an interactive media director, producer, and educator. She creates intergenerational storytelling experiences through the use of films, games, and apps. So she's right on the cutting edge. And she's designed interactive visual experiences using emerging media for museums, public spaces, and additionally other places. And she was an artist in residence at the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island National Monuments, which is really exciting. And her work has been exhibited at the National Gallery of Art, and as well as museums in Milan, the Brooklyn Museum, and many more. And she teaches at Bloomfield College and has advised the POV PBS Hackathon. So she's really an incredible powerhouse. And I know her from Film Fatales, which is another great organization of women filmmakers getting together to share experience and sometimes war stories and other times help a lot of times, which is a great thing. And then sitting to Theresa's right is Immy Humes, who will be representing the present. Immy Humes was nominated for an Academy Award for her first solo-directed documentary, A Little Vicious, which is about pit bulls, as well as race and class, and how they are kind of imbricated together in discourse about pit bulls. She is, I have to find all her honors. She's currently working on a portrait of the amazing radical filmmaker and video artist Shirley Clarke, who sadly has been much forgotten, but really was an incredible artist. She came out at the time of the new American cinema with all these, avant-garde makers like Jonas Mekas, and she was often the only woman in those pictures of all these avant-garde enfants terribles. So, but she really made amazing films that kind of straddle the border of fiction and documentary, and then went on to pioneer in video art, really kind of going places no one had gone before. And Immy's recent feature film, Doc, had a theatrical engagement at Film Forum and aired on PBS. And that is an amazing documentary about her father, Doc Humes, who was a writer and a co-founder of the Paris Review, among many other things. And she's won artist residencies from MacDowell, Mass MoCA, and Blue Mountain. And her films have been screened at MoMA and festivals from Amsterdam to Arkansas, which is where I'm from. And, she's worked on broadcasts that aired on PBS, NBC News, A&E, and National Geographic. So that's just, a short list. So let's start with Kate. And Kate, I think, is going to tell us a little bit about the Women Film Pioneers Project.
As Augusta said, I am the project manager of the Women Film Pioneers Project. And just to give you a little nitty-gritty behind-the-scenes history of the project, it was initially conceived in 1993, actually. But it didn't launch online until fall of 2013. So there was kind of a long history in between. It's produced in collaboration between Columbia Libraries and the Columbia Film Program. And if I had to, on the spot say a mission statement for the project, is that it is essentially a digital publication to advance research on and bring visibility to the hundreds and hundreds of women who worked as more than actresses all over the world before the coming of sound. So WFPP is comprised of two main elements, and so this is the homepage, I should say. We always have news, film discoveries, and book publications and call for papers. So the two main components are the overview essays and the career profiles. And if you just want to go to the overview essays tab, these are longer, peer-reviewed essays that are written about, a specific national film industry or a specific occupation. So if you scroll down a little, we have, this decoration one we recently published, and it's female cinema owners in Stockholm, Sweden, in the 1920s. But then right below we have an essay on French film colorists. So it's the women that hand-colored the films in France in the early days of cinema. And then in terms of the profiles, we have a lot more profiles than essays. These are shorter essays that look at a single individual and their career. So I just picked two random ones to kind of give you an example of what they look like. So this is, if you scroll down a little, you can see that Tressie Sutter's, I think I'm pronouncing her name right, there's only one paragraph. And there's no image. And that's because, there might not be the information about these women or the film that she made. And might be considered the first African-American woman to make a film in 1922. But this film is unfortunately lost. So there's really not too much that can go into the profile in this case. But we have longer profiles, like Marianne Wong, who, and we have images, which is great. So Marianne Wong, at the age of 21, I think, living and working in Oakland, California, she directed, produced, starred in, cast, I think did the costume designs, wrote it, a film to counter representations of Chinese on screen in 1916 and 1917. And what's so fantastic is that even though the film in its entirety does not exist, 35 minutes do. They were recently discovered, I think, in like 2006. So those 35 minutes are on DVD. They're very accessible, so I urge you to all go find The Curse of the Quan Guan. So if you scroll to the top, you can see we have the worked as, and then right below that is worked in. And we, in this kind of coming up with the structure of the page, we really wanted to emphasize that women were working in so many different roles behind the scenes. I mean, it's not just directing, it's not producing, it's editing, it's title writing, it's distributing, film accompanists, secretaries, telephone operators. Just there are so many roles we need to kind of be aware of. And then the two I showed you are from the United States, but we have profiles, this was a global phenomenon. We have profiles of women who were working in Russia, in the Philippines, in Turkey, in Tunisia, in Mexico. We just published 3 profiles about 3 separate Chinese pioneers. Well, I think one is the first director, the first Chinese female director, or is considered to be. But actually, to give you, if you go back to the profile, the pioneers page, thank you. I feel very bossy. Just to give you a different sense of the scope of the project. So on this page are about, I think as of today, I just checked before I came here, 258 women. Thank you. We started with 184, so when we launched in 2013, so we're very slowly expanding. But then internally, we have a list of 162 women who are assigned. So these profiles are coming, they're being researched. And I should mention that all our profiles are written by established film historians, so there's years and years of research going into each piece. So that's 262 or 258, 162, and then if you go to the last tab, the unassigned list. So there's 621 names. And these are names that we still have to research. We need to verify, were they more than actresses? Did they in fact work in the silent era? Because we really do like to keep it before the coming of sound. Or in some cases, we know that they just need to be assigned. And so, yeah, these numbers are, for me, having, I'm a film major. I never learned about a single woman in any of my film classes. And so to see, numbers that equal over 800 is mind-boggling to me. That like, why are we still learning that, DeMille and Edwin S. Porter and any other male director, was the inventor and shaped cinema. So I think these numbers directly challenge that really ingrained narrative. Yeah, so someone like Lois Weber, who I don't know how many people were at the screening of Shoes, I never saw any of her films. I was never taught her film. And I think her career is so interesting because it is really exemplary of how so many other women worked in the silent era, got into the industry, worked, and then were pushed out. She starts in the early 1900s as an actress, a screenwriter. She's co-directing films with her husband, but ultimately she becomes the dominant partner. She's prolific. She's making, Shoes is an example of her social problem film. So she's looking at contemporary issues. She's trying to engage middle class audiences in issues like contraception, capital punishment, what else? Poverty, wage inequity like shoes. She's really trying to engage. She's a socially provocative filmmaker, but she's working in many other genres. I mean, suspense is a thriller that should be taught alongside any intercutting film lesson in silent cinema. And I mean, Lois Weber was America's first major female filmmaker. And so these questions that kind of are implicitly raised with this panel, why is it important to see these films? Why is it important to celebrate female filmmakers? What's unique about them? Shoes is a really good example of why these questions matter, I think. Because Weber was writing in over 100 years ago. She was writing complex, three-dimensional characters for women. She was writing stories that centralized female struggles, female issues. She was mentoring actresses and screenwriters. She was advocating for leadership in Hollywood. She was just doing amazing things. And with Shoes, you see the focus on the female. You see the focus on the the female. You see Eva's interiority. You see her psyche, through the actual structure of the filmmaking, through the story itself. And I think as a female filmmaker, that's, part and parcel of what is important about Lois Weber, but also that she is, a part of our entire collective cinematic film or cinematic history. And then there was a question you had raised about why all these women were forgotten. And Weber, again, is a really interesting example. She left Universal in 1917 to start her own company, Lois Weber Productions. And at that point, Hollywood is obviously consolidating. It's becoming the studio system that we know to exist after. And once, everyone saw that film could make money, all the men came in, and a lot of scholars call that the masculinization of Hollywood, when the big corporations came in that pushed women out. And then, so when their early histories of cinema were being written in the 1920s and 1930s, it just didn't mention Weber. And that kind of led to the narrative that I'm still being taught in 2000 and whatever, I'm not gonna say, because I don't remember. But that leads directly to that. But kind of connecting this back to the two profiles I showed you, another challenge is that there just isn't a ton of information on some of these women. Films are lost. Women notoriously do not leave paper collections behind, whereas most male filmmakers did. So that's a problem. A lot of women do write memoirs, but those are not part of any academic film, lesson plan. I think Weber did try to write a memoir, but nothing ever happened to it. She actually, in her obituary, was labeled a star maker. It was just like Lois Weber, star maker dies. And so that effectively reduced all the directing and the producing and the screenwriting and the mentoring and just to this one thing where she found some actresses. So there's so many different challenges at so many different levels to kind of reclaim and remember these women. And so that's it's a challenge for everybody. But I think obviously these are, this is film history. This is our film history. So we can't ignore Lois Weber. We can't deny her work anymore. And I was just actually this morning, I was listening to a podcast about the obituary section in the New Yorker and how they're, rewriting, revisiting. And the editor on the podcast was talking about how who we choose to remember and how it's a value judgment, and whose value and that matter, that says something. And then also kind of it reflects society, and we need to make sure we need to like go back and study what we're reflecting, because so many people in so many different industries, from computer programming, or so many women and people of color in computer programming to film, are just completely left out. So it's the conversation that has to happen, has been happening, will happen in film, media, and across many different disciplines. I'm sure that wasn't 15 minutes, but.
Well, it was wonderful. And I think such great remarks about Lois Weber, and great to see other women like Tressie Southers, we think, up there on the screen. And it's such a huge oversight to not be paying attention to Lois Weber when silent cinema is being recorded, because those of you who are here for the film know that in the teens, there was a certain point when she was Hollywood's highest paid director. So it's not as if this was some marginal side industry that she was involved in. She was, at the top of the mainstream industry. So I want to turn things over now, Theresa, if maybe you would hand that mic down to Immy Humes, who is a kind of nice bridge for us because she's making a historical project.
Hello.
But she has experiences in the present, I think.
Hello. Does this work? So, wow. Yeah, I think it's so inspiring what you're doing, because it just catches the imagination. So the idea of, it makes me want to see the feature films based on their stories, like Tressie. It's sort of scintillating to me. Okay, so when I was invited to represent the present of women's filmmaking, I was really kind of flummoxed, because that's quite impossible to do. But I'm still thrilled and honored to be here in this sort of fraudulent role. And I will just plunge into telling you a little bit about the project I'm working on now. And possibly later I can include my own career, but basically, I've just been a documentary filmmaker in New York for a long time now, working in TV and film. But so I have been deep in a portrait film, or a biography, of the late, great Shirley Clarke. And it follows extremely well on what we've been hearing about lost filmmakers, because she... Anyway, what I'm going to do is show you a work sample that I've made of the feature film in progress. Instead of trying to tell you too much, we'll show you a private video. The reason it's private, it's like 8 minutes, I think. Hold on.
And maybe we should all get up the page.
9 minutes. And, well, wait, let me say 2 words, though, okay? Which is that this sample is, for those of you who are not used to this, it's basically for fundraising purposes, for foundations, for other people to try and, I'm trying to convince them to give us money. But it's, it's to show anyone what the film might be, to get a taste of our subject and our approach. And I want to say, it doesn't explain everything. And that's for 2 reasons. One is I don't have all the material yet, so there are some things I just kind of jump over, and it's compressed. And the other thing is that Shirley herself, I wanted to honor her spirit, and she made films that she really didn't want. She wanted the audience to work with her. She didn't want to make them simple. She, that was kind of like her base thing, was she didn't want to make things too easy or dumbed down. Several things struck me when you were talking, just there are themes that emerge that just don't ever seem to change. But Shirley's story is partly a story, she had a lot of success. She was radical. She was a key founder of independent film. Before Shirley and her generation, there was basically Hollywood film. Studio film, and then there was a movement of filmmakers in New York. This is an oversimplification, and I'm no scholar, but basically there was Hollywood, and then after, in the late 50s, early 60s in New York, there were a bunch of filmmakers who were basically jealous of the French New Wave and Italian neorealists and Japanese amazing cinema coming out of Japan after the war, and they were like, what about us? Can't we make our own new cinema? and they actually consciously banded together and issued a manifesto, which is fantastic, about the it's called the New American Cinema Group. Not exactly poetic, but there were now people call them the American New Wave, and Shirley was the only woman involved in that push, that movement, that generation. So, she was self-consciously starting her career as an outsider to Hollywood. She declared war on Hollywood. All those folks declared war on Hollywood. Their whole interest was to burn it down and to make movies that were real and about real people. In Shirley's case, she not always, but she almost always focused on Black people, whether it was actors in a cast, in a story, in a fiction story, or whether it was documentaries and, about, for example, Ornette Coleman, the great jazz genius. She almost always focused on Black stories, although she was a Jewish girl from Park Avenue. And, the point of her cinema was, everything that Hollywood was not. Everything that Hollywood did not represent is pretty much what Shirley and her generation of filmmakers were for, and they were trying to find new ways for distribution. And in a way, it sounds very contemporary. It's like every generation of filmmakers in this country, at least, go through this, trying to create a free cinema, a new cinema, and succeeding to some degree, and then getting crushed. Because, Shirley's story personally is she made 2 features. They were done entirely outside the cinema with early crowdfunding. And they were very successful critically. They were very successful in France, and less successful here because they were considered obscene and, they're basically too much for people. And then when she wanted to, after her first 2 features, independent features, she wanted to go to Hollywood, she wanted to get funding, she was locked out, which is not so surprising, but for a lot of reasons. But she was stuck, she was slowed down. She was really could not get money for a 3rd feature, so she started doing documentaries. And she actually denied that there was any difference between the 2. There is no such thing as a documentary, she said. No such trip is what she actually said, which I think is really radical. So anyway, but she was, I'm fascinated with the idea of the only woman. I'm rambling a little here, I hope that's okay. But I'm really fascinated with the idea of the only woman. I've sort of been obsessed with that because I think there's this phenomenon, at least when I was growing up, it struck me that there was often a sole woman, available to me as a young person to see in whatever horizon I would look at. In politics, there would be the one woman senator, or, Susan Sontag was the one woman intellectual, or so it seemed to me. I don't think that, so I think it's a phenomenon it's never literally true. There are always other women working. There are always other people, but there's often, I think, at least in the last 30, 40 years, there has been this, maybe it's a transitional time, I don't know, there's often this cultural phenomenon, I think, and this is entirely my own little obsession, where there's one woman identified, and it's a tokenism, and, it goes from, it doesn't even necessarily mean the first woman, because there could be just one, and then 2, in the row, like they pass the baton. But so I was really, I think it's sad in a way to listen to your story of how women were really key to creating our first cinema, and then there's this story of erasure, of being pushed out, and erasure and forgetting. And then over and over, Shirley's story, I think, follows that same trajectory of she pushed in her radical way. She credits the fact that she had money, actually. It's important to know, it's not in this yet, but she credits the fact that she had money with being able to give her the power to actually push and have enough momentum to get in to the boys' club. But then after, she made 4 really important films and really groundbreaking films, and both in terms of their content and also in terms of their filmmaking. Really, each one is quite a serious contender. And yet, she was forgotten. I mean, her films were not available. There's not a single book about her. If you look up John Cassavetes, to whom, she loaned him her gear so he could make his first film, Shadows. Cassavetes has, there are like, I don't know, there are more than 10 books about Cassavetes. I think there are probably like 60. but there isn't a single book about Shirley. So I'm involved in a reclamation project here myself, just as you are, in a sense, of trying to recover our lost genius. And that in itself brings up a whole lot of other issues about women's history and being, sort of having waves of pioneers that are then written out of history, and, again and again and again, we're trying to reclaim what we have done. It's quite extraordinary that it's still going on. I mean, 4% of women directors in Hollywood are women. It's like, anyway, so I'm drifting, so give me some shape.
Well, I'm actually, I think, going to turn it over to Theresa, who's part of the new wave, making immersive media. And maybe we can get up just Theresa's site up there, and then she can direct us to other things as she goes. I think this is so important, Immy, that this continues on. But also going back to something that Kate said, I mean, we actually do have the power to change some of this. So if you know someone you think should have an obituary written for them, write it or find someone who will.
And the New York Times is soliciting. You can email and suggest. You can email the New York Times. They have a thing on this new obituary section where you can suggest women or overlooked people to that section.
Yeah, so the New York Times is actually trying to change that. So we should help them if we can, and stack up a big
I
paper
thought it was
trail,
because
leave a big
only
paper
white men
collection.
die.
Well, I don't know. We can investigate. So let me pass it on to Theresa.
Thank you, Augusta, for having me. It's really exciting to be here today, and also to listen to Kate and to listen to Immy. There are many female filmmakers whose histories I still don't know, so I really appreciate the project, because I think there's material that we can use as filmmakers, and we can learn to express that, whether it's through film, narrative film and documentary, using digital, using 16mm 35, going to do something in augmented reality or virtual reality. So there are ways that we can use sort of traditional storytelling, right, but apply them using the new technology if we choose to, right? I also think it's interesting, Immy, you've been working with Milestone Films on your project, so there is a continuum. I had done some work with Milestone, helping them with their website and definitely bringing more attention, and it was an education for me, to learn about, well, not just female filmmakers, but like Charles Burnett's work. I mean, other people whose work has not been, it's taken a while to be, or still needs to be, fully appreciated, right? And the beauty of some of these films that are being remastered and coming to life, again, we can think about how else we might want to apply that using today's technology. So that said, yeah, I can tell you a little bit about sort of what I'm working on now and some of the projects I've worked on in the past, to give you a sense of how I work with my process, but also the process of other people right now who are multidisciplinary. And arguably, most of us are multidisciplinary now. We don't really have a choice. It's exciting. It's hard to stay focused, but at the same time, it's an interesting time to experiment. So I think one of the takeaways that I've had throughout my career is to figure out how to do little tests and then see how to expand with the projects. Not all the projects will continue, right? And even speaking with our film collective, the Film Fatales, you can see how many different projects our women are juggling. Most people are juggling in the air right now, and I think it's a learning process to figure out what is going to stick, or like how to manage time and pursue what projects, right? So in terms of something that I've been working on, there is a project that is called Bought Broken, and I think it is there, yeah. And this is it's a multimedia project that I've been prototyping over the past few years. And, as a trigger warning, it's looking at domestic violence. And I'm looking at domestic violence through the lens of objects that are broken in the relationship as the relationship devolves. And I'm looking to do this in a couple different veins. One is through a potential website. This is a prototype that I built myself. Well, when I say myself, it was using a template that exists, on the web. So it's something that, with STEM and STEAM and these ideas of, engineering and science, Kate, you had, alluded to this before, right? And getting women and children, girls involved. I think it's a great way that if somebody's very interested in a piece of concept, a content, that you can find other partners. Collaboration is key, but then also there are some tools right now where if you're curious, you can try to build them on your own, right? I've also workshopped this at Hunter College as well. And I have another film collective called The Film Shop. So it is this power of collaboration, right? So with this project, in addition to the website, I've also prototyped something where I was taking LEDs. So kind of like when you have a little battery light and you take a coin cell, like when you're lighting up a little battery, you connect the two leads together and it lights up. So I have one part with little leads sticking out and the other battery. I put it with pieces of a broken object. When you put it together, it lights up. I put it then over an ambient light sensor, and then it triggers the film. And the film is a short animated piece, and it's telling stories that right now are based on fact but are hybrid. So some of them are fictional stories of survivors, of people who have experienced intimate partner violence. Now, I've also thought about doing this, and I went to a hackathon at MIT in October. And what I did was worked with some other people who I didn't know them until we arrived there, and it was one weekend, and we prototyped some objects in virtual reality. So in the headset, you're able to, with Gear VR, you're able to pick up these broken pieces, you put them together, and then it will tell you a story. And some of the things that came out of that hackathon, which I had thought about in the back of my head but never really had time to think about, was, well, could this be a therapeutic? Because I'm looking at it as an artist through an artistic lens. And I don't know if it will end up being a therapeutic manifestation at the end of the project, but it was something, again, to help me think about how to prototype an idea, right? And I've also talked to some nonprofits, including a nonprofit here in New York called Day One. And so Day One New York deals with intimate partner violence among teens, dating violence. And so it is, perhaps a sad fact, but not. I mean, it can start very young, or if it's something that you've learned from your family or if you've experienced yourself, right? So what better way than to try to educate young people? And so there was a workshop in February where I was able to also show kind of my process, talk to students and educators and collect some stories. So again, this is a project that for me, because I'm juggling these other projects as well, is something that's very close to my heart. And but I'm still figuring out the best way that it's going to go out into the world. But I am looking to collect more stories, and I did talk to someone at that workshop, and she's a young woman, I think early 20s, who's interested in collaborating with me. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted. So that's an example of something that has, a film component. There's also motion graphics. I'm dealing with a woman, a Filipina American woman who was animating. And then I'm looking to collaborate potentially with a programmer to help me, additional programmers to help me in this virtual space. And then the final component could be, if there is an installation component, if I'm able to do it, is to build a big totem, whether it's out of paper mache or fiberglass, So I've been thinking, how can we make these objects greater than, or how do we signify overcoming? And so again, these are not solid ideas. I've been thinking about them for a long time, and I am anxious about failing. Yet again, I know that I need to try and I need to iterate, right? So that's one of the projects that I'm working on right now. The other project, and perhaps there's a TEDx link to Brenda. I think it's on. Let's see. I don't know.
Up there, Brenda Romero.
Yeah. Okay. So I encourage you to watch this at your own leisure, not right now, but you can see that it's called Gaming for Understanding. And the reason why I want to bring up this is, so currently I'm working on something that's a more traditional documentary, but I'm also looking at the manifestation of what that's going to be in interactive format. And I don't have the answer yet, but I just wanted to explain to you what I'm thinking about and how. So her last name now is Brenda Romero, and Brenda has been working in the game industry for over 25 years. So she's a pioneer. She works in digital format, but then she also does one-of-a-kind board games. And they're games, but they're also about very difficult historical topics. This one that she's showing is kind of a combination, I believe, of her heritage. She's part Irish American, and also representing like her family and also some of the struggles that her family and other people who are Irish and Irish American have gone through. She also she's created games. One of them was also about the Middle Passage, because her daughter learned about the Middle Passage, and that's what this talk is about, where she just came home and sort of was like, "Mommy, well, like people went on a boat." I mean, it sounded to Brenda like her daughter was explaining a cruise, right? And of course, the Middle Passage is such a profound event that affected so many people that she ended up creating a game. And so the game is about like rolling dice and taking turns and using index cards and structuring. Maybe not everyone can make it to the new world, right? Maybe people have to be put in the water. So she's, to me, a fascinating character, a woman who is a very strong individual, who is in the gaming world, is still predominantly, there are many men, controlled by men. She is, unapologetically who she is, and a very wonderful human being. She has a blended family now, so she and her partner have 6 children between the two of them. 4 of them live at home. They've moved from the United States to Ireland. And her husband is also a game developer. He's actually one of the designers of Doom, which was a first-person shooter, and they're still creating games. So for me, it's a really it's a project that's really close to my heart, because I've also developed games, and I'm also fascinated about what it means to be a woman, to be a strong woman, and to continue in a field that doesn't always favor both either women nor getting older. Right. So tentatively, the working title of the piece is called Game On. And what I'm trying to do is, again, I see a traditional documentary in the sense of like, I'm filming her, right? And in addition, what is it going to be? Is it going to be something in augmented reality? Is it going to be a combination of a physical board game where I have like people, create pieces, and maybe you could do it at home, or you could also do it at certain gatherings. And then through rolling dice and like flipping cards and learning how to make games, you're also learning about yourself. And then is there an interactive component to it that's digital? So again, check back with me and see, but that's another example of how we're using traditional methods from film and taking them and applying them now to the interactive space. So I think those are 2 examples of what I've been working on recently that I think, is a good, to give a good taste of like process. I'm happy to talk more later. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thinking of some ancient stories that are coming up because of this VR example of putting these pieces together. But, in the story of Isis and Osiris, Osiris is killed and his body is cut up all into pieces and spread all over Egypt. And Isis has to literally remember him. So I think, in a way, we all work on doing that through filmmaking, through game making or VR making, through the Women Film Pioneers Project, through the Portrait of Shirley. And we're trying to repopulate history to be more like it actually was, or to be inclusive of more experiences instead of the dominant experience that gets recorded so much. So I'm hoping you guys have some questions. Anyone have a question that's burning a hole in their pocket? So the question, I don't know if everyone could hear, was, where do you get your research for the Women Film Pioneers Project?
Well, I should say up front that none of this is my research. I feel like I'm taking credit for hundreds of film scholars who have in their PhD or in their professorship career have gone to archives around the world and actually viewed these films there, gone through the archival paper collections, looked at primary and secondary sources. So really, it's this site is kind of the result of everyone's research and all around the world. How do I? Oh, I put it online. No, so as the project manager, I kind of do many different things. I edit the entries. I format them we're on WordPress, so I put them onto WordPress. I work with each contributor during the entire publishing process to find images, to get permission to use the images, all that stuff. And then I kind of help with, we're trying to do more screenings, more exhibitions, because these films should be seen. And so that's something I'm working on. I oversee the graduate students that are involved. So that I do a lot of different things. I don't know if that was your question, but what's so interesting about Lois Weber is one of her films was found in New Zealand. So these films are all over, but yeah, private collections, or mislabeled in other in other archives. But yeah, Library of Congress, George Eastman, UCLA, all over. And New York Public Library actually has quite a few. Yeah. We provide clips at the bottom of some of the profiles, but we also provide a list of DVD, places where you can get DVDs. So, we have Milestone has been doing phenomenal work, with Lois Weber, but also Frances Marion, who's a screenwriter, and Lottie Reiniger, who is an animator. So DVDs, that's what we're kind of have right now. We don't have full films, but so if do you mind going to the Marion E. Wong tab? Yeah, so we put a little clip of The Curse of the Quan Guan, when the Far East mingles with the West, I think is the tagline. So it's just a clip of the film. You don't have to actually play it.
And you can rent it on Vimeo, it says.
Yes, and you can rent it on Vimeo.
But you can watch the short clip for free.
Exactly. I think it's $1.99 on Vimeo. You can rent it.
You can do it.
Yeah. The question is, am I going to play with the form in the documentary about Shirley? Because that's absolutely. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity and also quite a challenge, because she was a great portraitist. She made some seriously great film portraits. And so here I am making a film portrait of the portraitist. But I mean, I think what I'm trying to do, so far as I know, is I want to bring out in my style her themes. For example, in the opening of the sample, in the very opening where it's from the actor's gaze to her gaze, these questions of interlocking gaze, it's partly my way of sort of framing the question of gaze, and but I'm sort of eager to I'm eager to play with the form in ways that make sense for her, absolutely. But I
was wondering if you had any interactive ideas for Shirley.
I think I should collaborate.
That's what I thought. That was what I thought. Great minds.
I think there might be something brewing right at this table. I'm seriously going why aren't I doing?
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways of. I'm not the expert on it, but I can tell you from my experience what I've seen. Following Brenda Romero around in Ireland, she speaks at different places, and one of the places was an institute dealing with medical students and doctors. And so in the medical profession, it was interesting because it wasn't just apps to the students came up with apps and experiences that I, as a layperson, just didn't occur to me. So it wasn't just about practicing, if you're a dentist or a doctor, practicing in the operating room. But I think it was also things I don't remember if it was hand washing, or there were certain steps and usefulness, certain tips that came up. So I think one of the ways is to lead there is, like at the Stanford Design School, there is a theory now called design thinking, and it's kind of a trendy term, but it's quite useful, and I think it's the way of how do you prototype, how do you start with writing an idea down, or maybe using Post-it notes and brainstorming, and then taking those ideas and then solidifying them a bit more, and then prototyping. So I think in terms of other things that I've seen work and when I've been working with students is also to figure out, sure, like entertainment-wise, shoot 'em up games or things that are, whether you think they're violent or controversial. These are games are. It's a good way to come up and address potentially controversial topics. I mean, they're never easy to discuss, but in a classroom setting, there are ways that maybe you can do it that without a game environment would just be a little more difficult to address. So at Bloomfield, for example, I wasn't involved in this game design class, but I think it was something saying if you were a person of color, given different weightings of your experiences, how might certain things in your life look differently, right? I mean, they didn't talk about it. I didn't see it and all the full experience, but in my mind it could be like, well, stop and frisk or like certain percentages. There are ways that statistics, it's one thing when you see a statistic, it's another thing if you are either experiencing it, within a virtual reality headset, or you're playing this game, you're rolling dice and things are happening, right? And you're inhabiting a character. So those are some of the examples. Yeah.
So I have a question for Theresa, because you started to bring up these fields, these interactive fields are predominantly male, and you're kind of pushing your way in. So, what's your experience been of that? And also, do you have ideas for how that can be changed? And so, that's a big question. I'm asking you big questions, but tell me what you think.
Sure. It's a tough question. I think, So in my experience, in my limited experience, producer roles, women are in a lot of producer roles. Women are directors, but I think, and there are people like Jessica Brilhart at Google, there are a number of women, right? We can experiment and we can move forward. The field is still young. I think that, my struggle is that I produce and direct, and I have the struggle of like, just making it work as a director, or like taking that risk and being like, well, I can balance, but like when I want to direct, I want to direct, and I can, right? So I don't have the answer for that. I mean, there is a Facebook group called Women in VR, Women in AR, VR. There are a bunch of different meetup groups for people who are in film broadly, and now with film because it encompasses interactive as well. So like my group, the Film Shop and Film Fatales, there are people who do both. So I do think in terms of like trying to support each other, I love during the Oscars that the talk about the inclusion rider, right? We don't quite have that in, or that I've been privy to in terms of my work, but I know that I'm conscious of trying to work with people to have like a diverse representation, as much as possible. So I don't have the answer, but I also think with young people growing up too, and this is where I'd love to see more of the statistics, because it's cooler now to do gaming and to program than it was actually when I was growing up. I mean, it's still kind of a nerdy thing, I think, but seen as like acceptable, not just acceptable, somewhat trendy, but I think there is a difference between if you want to do more of a hardcore programming side of it, and then, if you want to direct. Now, there's value to doing both, and hopefully we can find people who can do both. I think you shouldn't be afraid either way, but we do have to figure out how to just keep motivating young women and women to pursue and excel. And yeah, I wish I had the answer, but I think it is more, what was shocking to me about the whole Me Too spectacle, shall we say, is that having some conversations with men who I thought were very educated, seemingly, right? And there's still more to go in terms of like, how do you deal on an everyday level? How do you be mindful? How are some things you might overlook? And also women, because sometimes as much as we think women can be collaborative, women aren't always the most supportive of other women. And so I do think there are things we can do as individuals and things that we can do on an organizational and in an educational level to push it forward. But I wish I had more concrete suggestions.
So the question is, have you encountered overt sexist remarks or hostility from male game makers or anyone in that field?
So I guess I've had the fortune, and I haven't worked on so many games, that the people who I've worked with, the teams, they're very open-minded, respectful people. So I have been fortunate. I think Brenda might be able to share some other stories where that may or may not have been the case. I mean, and definitely with, things like Gamergate that's been going on in the community, it's it is a problem. And I think what we have to do, and I think it's come out in the dialogue most recently, is not only as women to stand up and say something, but as men, or if you're a they, if you self-identify across the gender spectrum, to be willing to stick up for other people when you think you see something that's not right.
This has been such a great conversation. I could talk to all of you women for hours. We have a reception starting right outside, and then we'll have a screening of some films submitted to the Festival of Films in Competition for our various awards. So please join me in giving a big round of applause to Immy Humes, Theresa Loong, and Kate Saccone.